I'll begin then. Thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to this panel session. My name is Nayyara and I'll be chairing the session for today. The topic is effectiveness of interventions among at-risk youth for prevention of antisocial and delinquent behavior. We have an exciting list of topics today, sports, mentoring, and wilderness to be delivered by our panelists. And the plan for today's session is I'll start by giving a brief overview of how we use systematic reviews to assess effectiveness of interventions. And I'll talk about how we make knowledge accessible as an organization. And then we'll have the sports, mentoring, and wilderness interventions. So to begin with the first overview, I'll give a brief overview about the Youth Endowment Fund. I work as Senior Research Manager at the Youth Endowment Fund, and I'm our lead on commissioning of systematic reviews. And about the YEF, we are an independent organization, and we are part of the UK network of What Works centers. So everything that we do is based on evidence. Our mission is to prevent children and young people from getting involved in violence. And we have a 200 million endowment from the Home Office to assess effectiveness of interventions. Just briefly, our strategy is that it's three-pronged. Firstly, we try to fund good quality work. Secondly, we try to find out what works. And our main mission is to do systematic reviews, RCTs, and in trying to understand what works in preventing children and young people from becoming involved in violence. And then we work towards change by scaling up and spreading good practice. We do all of these strategic work by working with a variety of partners and coalitions that include the Youth Center, public health departments, and local authorities and police. In how we try to make knowledge accessible. So we do a lot of systematic reviews that feed into our two key products. So the first product is the YEF Evidence and Gap Map, and the second product is the YEF Toolkit. So the YEF Evidence and Gap Map is essentially the back end. It's the technical sort of resource which has more than 2,000 studies where you can look at what are the studies that are effective to prevent youth violence and crime. And the toolkit is actually the front page. It's more useful for practice and policy. A lot of academics use the evidence and gap map and policy analysts, whereas practitioners generally tend to use the toolkit because the information that we have in the toolkit is very easy to understand. The toolkit gives an overview of our existing research on approaches to prevent serious youth violence. This is what the YEF toolkit looks like. We have a series of 13 approaches. You can look what the quality of the evidence quality is of a particular kind of approach. You can see the impact of the approach on violent crime. So for after-school programs, we can see that the impact on violent crime is low. The evidence quality is quite good. The cost is quite low. When you click on one of these links, you get this. You get even more details. You can see what the prevention type is like, whether it's a primary, secondary, tertiary settings, where the approach can take place, and the theme, the YEF theme that it falls under. So next in line, we have the three systematic reviews that we recently funded, and Campbell South Asia did that. These are on sports, mentoring, and wilderness. So I'll ask my first panelist to actually do the sports interventions, Suchi. I'll do a quick introduction on Suchi before she does presents her work on sports. So Suchi works in Campbell South Asia as an evidence synthesis specialist. She specializes in women and child development, gerontology, health, disaster, women and child well-being. She has worked on evidence generation for policies and programs with the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization in India's Health Ministry. So, Suchi, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I will be presenting. Just give me 1 minute. I share my screen. I think so. Last time also this happened. Just give me 1 minute. Uh, it takes some time for to share your presentation here. I'm hoping that it's visible now.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So, I will be presenting the sports review. Myself, Suchi. I'm working with Campbell, South Asia, evidence synthesis specialist. Chair already introduced me. The sports review. It's actually effects of sports and physical activity intervention for at-risk and offending children and young people on behavioral, psychosocial, and offending outcome. It's a mixed method systematic review and a meta-analysis. First of all, I really want to acknowledge and thanks our funder, Youth Endowment Fund, for this review. And also, I want to acknowledge our team member and thanks all the authors of this review, and also the contribution of our information specialist, John Iyer, about this review. So, like we actually did we actually studied about what's the current status of the sports review and what is like the youth crime. So we actually see that over 13 years, like there was a 80% reduction in youth offending, but the major drive of this, like a pre-court diversion activities by the police and the youth offending team. So youth offending team actually refer you to a variety of activities, and one of them is sports intervention. But we also see that there was evidence of shift to more serious offending by children, like assaults or violence against the person. And we also see that knife-related crimes also increased by 66%. Even though there is a reduction, but then there was like a more serious offending was increased. Uh, and then we also like what we actually meant by sports. So we actually taken up this definition from a Council of Europe, European Sports Charter, which actually states that sports means all form of physical activity, which through casual and organized participation aims at improving the mental well-being, forming a social relationship, or obtaining results in competition at all levels. This definition actually includes all physical activity, which also say dance and yoga, and these are actually also included in our review. This sports intervention program have a potential to address several significant risk factors for risky and antisocial behavior and offending. So when we are actually doing this review, and we also think that there should be like there is already an existing theories and a casual processes how to achieve your intermediate and like final outcomes. So there is one of the theory which is like recapitalization theory, which is surplus energy theory. So there was it's actually rest on the assumption that children and the youth needs to let off stream. So they actually need a channel to actually to use their surplus energies to use into play or a sports, so that it's actually prevent them to emerge into a disruptive or antisocial behavior and aggression. There's also one of the theory which also said about diversion theory. So youth actually needs some diversion, like to engage, like not to be engaged into antisocial behaviors, but to divert it into more organized activities or more like organized sports activities. So there are actually two types of diversion, like direct and indirect diversion. Direct in diversion, we actually send that time spent in an organized sports activity, and indirect diversion is like time spent training for the sports at other times. There's also one of the theory which actually supports that how sports helpful, like subculture theory, which say that if you are diverted the youth and the children into more organized activities like sports, so they have like it has an effect of not hanging in out with the peers who encourage antisocial behavior. Personality theory, sports actually has a like long held view that sports actually helps in character building. If you're engaging into a regular sportsing activities, it's improving your sports performance, which is a sporting capital. And then it's like it's when you are engaging into it, like it's actually require regular practice and hard work, which helps you to improve your self-control or self-discipline, which with success building it to improve your self-worth or like self-esteem. And by this all these theories, there were other theories as well, role model theories. So with all this theory, we actually come up with this theory of change, which actually said these are the inputs we actually needed, which is like sports facilities and equipments, and then the activities like sports session, relationship with the coach, sports plus activities, which actually gives us the strength and assets to social capital, externalizing risky behavior, pro-social values, self-worth, academic achievement, and connection to the services. And this connection to services is more engaged with the sports plus activities. Like you're not doing sports, but you're also like connected to different services, academic achievement or like employment. And then with this, it actually helps you to intermediate outcome, which is also intermediate outcome of this, like gang membership, mental health, school engagement, employment, and service use, which also leads to a final outcome of this review, which is anti-social offending and violent behavior reduced into including violent crimes, and then also improving the life outcomes. What is the objective of this review, which actually very much like explained the theory of change with this review. It's like we are actually seeing the effects of sports and a physical activity intervention for at-risk children and youth aged up to 25 years in changing antisocial behavior and offending outcomes. This is a final outcome that we really want to see. The second outcome we really want to see intermediate outcomes such as time use and psychosocial outcomes that affects antisocial behavior and offending outcomes. We also have like wants to see success factors and barriers that affects the implementation of sports and physical activities, and that's the reason we actually included process evaluation in the qualitative studies. We also look into the cost effectiveness of sports intervention for at risk children and youth up to 25 years. This is the PICO. So earlier we actually planned to use children with the age of 18 years, but we also see that there is a trend that youth crime also includes. So we actually include our participants as youth and children aged up to 25 years who have exhibited or are deemed at risk of antisocial or violent behavior or offending. So the children who are at risk also part of it, or children who are already offended are also part of this review. With intervention, it's not only the sports we also looked into, we also looked into physical activity based intervention. And we only include secondary or tertiary intervention. So secondary intervention is with the youth who are at risk, and tertiary intervention is the youth who are already offended. We have not included a primary intervention or universal intervention, which is actually implemented sports program into a school for all the children. So that is not the part of this review. With sports plus intervention, we actually used as also one of the intervention, because it's used sports as a hook to add additional activities like giving us social skills training, counseling, and basic education, and also providing them connection to the services, employment. The outcome is like primary outcome, secondary outcomes. In primary outcome, we actually see behavioral, psychosocial offending outcome, which includes aggression, antisocial behavior, offending, and violent crime. With secondary outcome, we actually see values, attitude, and belief and sporting ability or attachment to the team, yes, club, and sports. With barriers and facilitator, any quantitative or qualitative data that we found in a barriers and facilitation, such as participation rate. We also see it into cost effectiveness. In design, we use experimental design, RCT, non-experimental design with the non-randomized assigned with comparison group, process evaluation and qualitative studies, and also cost effectiveness studies, cost effectiveness intervention. We excluded the before versus after in the design. In terms of search methodology, we actually search the primary studies from academic data. We also search the grade literature, organized searches from other organizations, and also additional website. We also search the relevant journals about sports for this review. Prisma. So with the academic data, we actually got a very good number of the studies, which is like 3658. But then when we actually reach out to the full text screening, there were only 739 studies that we found. But among them, we actually excluded a lot of studies because there were a lot of studies with no control group, and a lot of studies were not an intervention studies. So we excluded, and then the last studies that we actually finally included into our review is like we got 4 mixed method studies. We got 18 effectiveness studies and 38 process evaluation qualitative studies. So what is the finding of this review? So I have already, like we got 4 RCTs, 80 non-experimental design, and 42 process evaluation. There were only 2 studies that we got, which I had an information on cost effectiveness and cost analysis. With the region wise, we actually got 43% of the studies from North America, and then 37 studies from Europe and Central Asia, and we got very less study from Middle East and North Africa, and we got no study from South Asia. So we also like, this is also one of the like, so in the age of the participants, like what kind of like age. So if you see that 19 to 14 years, like 45 studies we got, And 15 to 80 years, like there were 37 studies which talked about, and then we also got some studies which talked about youth with 18 years, above 18 years, and there were also 12 studies which talked about youth like less than under 9. So in terms of intervention categories, so there were like number of studies as per intervention candidates. We got a lot of studies which also like which actually held into community settings, like 28 studies. And then the second like intervention settings were school, like 23 studies were actually had an intervention happen in the school setting and targeting to youth at risk. And then they were actually with the community where it's like at risk. And we only got 3 studies which happened in the custodial settings, and there were only 3 studies on summer camps on something non-custodial residential or happened in the sports or a youth club. We also did a critical appraisal of the effectiveness studies and the process evaluation. So in critical appraisal, we actually said that there were 90% of the studies overall confidence is low. So even though we got a very like 18 studies only on the effectiveness, but then the confidence, like overall study confidence is very low on 90% of the studies, and 10% of the studies are high. Like it's a high because it has included all the like parameters of effectiveness critical appraisal. In process evaluation, the numbers are just like almost 86% of the studies are overall confidence low, 7% of the studies are medium, and 7% of studies are high in the confidence of study. So main findings. So first of all, we got large or moderate significant effects on offending, aggression, and both externalizing and internalizing behavior. But it's like a small number of studies with a low confidence in study findings. We got no significant effects on social skills, pro-social peers, and pro-social behavior. There is no significant effects on self-esteem, no significant effect on academic achievement from a small number of studies. There is no quantitative estimates on like time use and diversion and relationship with the adult. Although in the process evaluation, we find that this is a very important, we identified it's very important when we did a qualitative synthesis, diversion in the relationship with the adult or relationship with the coach. And we got no quantitative data. In meta-analysis, we actually use this 3-level meta-analytical model because it allows us the inclusion of multiple effect size from a same evaluation for a different outcomes, different types of reports, and different groups. So we use the metaphor package on R to generate this result. So if you see that, it's like if you see this forest plot, it's actually saying that the sports has a desirable effects on delinquency, like actually reduce it, and then the odd ratio is like 2.46. And the next is like I'm like aggression. So even though in aggression we also see there is a effective in like sports intervention is effective in reducing the aggression also. These are the studies I mentioned, and then these are the log odd ratio, and there's the observed effects. Desirable effects is like 0 above, and then undesirable is like -1. So we see that there is a effective, like sports intervention were effective in reducing aggression and also delinquency. This is a quantitative synthesis. So we actually see all the outcome and what we like. So in offending and aggression, we see that there is a large effect. That is also seen in the forest process. In externalizing, also we see that there is a moderate effect from 8 studies, but all the 8 studies were of low confidence. In internalizing behavior, also we see large effect with small number of studies. There were only 5 studies. With delinquent peer, we got no, like because there were no studies, with only 1 studies with a low confidence. In pro-social behavior, we got 4 studies, but there was no effect from that small number of studies. Social skill, we got 4 studies, but there were like no effects from it. Self-esteem, we got 3 studies, and there were no effects from in any effects on the self-esteems. In academic achievement, we got actually 3 studies, but it's like it does not show any effect on it. Time use and adult relationship, we don't get any information on the quantitative synthesis, but in qualitative, it's actually supported that it has an effect. Like diversion has an effect on improving the antisocial and offending behavior.
Suchi, we have 2 minutes left. If you could quickly
Yeah.
maybe wrap up, please.
Yeah, so like I will just like touch on the qualitative synthesis. So we got like why the iteration is like, so there was a natural iteration, like the children move out of it, and then they were like they actually progressed, they actually from the sports they actually refer to some other group, and then also sanction, like they were like sanctioned, or they like lost several children from her studies because like a temporary suspension of the group, or the children have actually lost interest. These are the like facilitator. It was fun from the children actually said it in the qualitative setting. Like they also helped in career advancement. They also want to become a coach. So they, and something they have to do is like it's actually telling about the boredom hypothesis or diversion and incentives. These are the barriers and facilitators to achieve the outcomes that we got from our qualitative. Like, so they got a good relationship with the coach and structure pathway. And then also saying like it's actually program is actually referring to matching with the child needs. In barriers, we said that the lack of soft skills and coaches, transport, lack of family support, and engaging with anti-social peers. What is the casual process that we got from the qualitative synthesis? That diversion, role of coach, incentives, life skill, positive pathways, and they also get a good friendship because they were part into sports, mental health, self-regulation, aggression. These all helped into achieving the final outcome of like like anti-social and offending. And then there was also no evidence on time use, and but it was strongly supported by a qualitative synthesis, time use and the role of the coach. Only 2 studies were found on the cost analysis, which say that the sports intervention is cost effective. What is the implication for research, practice, and policy? We said that there is a need for a high quality evidence, especially effective studies to determine the effects of the intervention. We only got 2 studies on a cost effectiveness intervention. So it's good if we have more studies on the cost effectiveness for policy relevance. There was no evidence from South Asia countries. We also see that the sports intervention is effective in antisocial offending. Like we got in aggression, and we also got in delinquency and externalizing, internalizing. We got that there is an effect of it, but there are like small number of studies with low confidence in the finding. Even though review have actually identified many facilitation and learning barriers, and this can be used into a successful models to replicate into area with high risk youths and custodial settings. We only got 3 studies from a custodial setting. There's a less evidence from sports plus intervention. We don't got much evidence from sports plus intervention. There were more on sports and the physical activity. More outcomes should be covered, like time use, and then there also we have to be a long run effects. Like if you have any question, thank you. If you have any question, you can just ask me. Many thanks.
Thank you, Suchi. Let's take questions at the end. Uh, if someone has any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat box. We'll move on to the next presentation by Monisha. Uh, Monisha is Monisha Narayan is a mental health professional from Campbell, South Asia. She's a qualitative researcher. Her research interests include child and adolescent mental health, community-based mental health, gender-based violence, and mental health of persons and institutions. She works as an evidence synthesis specialist with Campbell, South Asia. Monisha, over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Nayyara. Thank you for the introduction. I will quickly share my screen and start the presentation.
The volume of your voice is very low.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, sure. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monisha Narayan, and I work as an evidence synthesis specialist with Campbell, South Asia. Today, we will be discussing the impact of adult mentoring programs in reducing antisocial violent and offending behavior. I will be talking about the work that we've done so far with regard to an ongoing systematic reviews. And I will also have try and have present briefly about youth crime in the Indian context and the potential relevance of the findings of this review in the Indian context. So I will start with an overview of the map, of the review. The title of the review is The Effectiveness of Adult Mentoring Programs in Reducing Antisocial Violent and Offending Behavior in Children aged 17 years and below, a mixed method systematic review. The authors of this review are myself, Peter Tolan, and Dr. Howard White, and the review has been funded by the Youth Endowment Fund. So the research questions for this review are: what is the evidence on the effectiveness of adult mentoring programs in reducing antisocial, violent, and offending behavior in children aged under 18 years? Are these effects sustained after the end of mentoring? What are the barriers or the facilitators that affect the successful implementation of mentoring programs in children aged under 18 years? What are the supporting or the facilitating factors that contribute to the implementation of adult mentoring programs in children aged under 18 years? Which aspects or features of adult mentoring programs promote the reduction of antisocial, violent, and criminal behavior in children aged under 18 years? And finally, what is the evidence on programs relating to costs and incremental costs? So the incremental costs is the cost of providing the interventions over and above the cost of usual services. With regard to population, children aged up to and including 17 years who have or deemed at risk of offending antisocial behavior interventions, the review will only focus on adult mentoring interventions for at-risk group up to 17 years. So the review will not look at other forms of mentoring such as informal mentoring and peer mentoring. In terms of outcome, the primary outcomes for the review are violence, antisocial behavior, and offending. The secondary outcomes are mental health, positive behavior change, and healthy interpersonal relationships. And the third outcomes are relating to cost effectiveness and cost benefit analysis. With regard to study designs, the review will include randomized control trials and non-experimental studies, except before versus after studies. And the review will also include qualitative studies of intervention, process evaluations, and draw from reports representing cost data. The setting of the review is global. The need for the review. So far, there has only been one review that talks about the effect of mentoring on offending outcomes in youth, and this review was conducted in the year 2013. So this review needs updating, and none of the existing systematic reviews are mixed methods reviews, and also there is evidence that talks about the high rates of attrition in mentoring programs. So none of the existing systematic review looks into this issue, and of course, the funder of our review, Youth Endowment Fund, is interested in the impact of mentoring on child violence, which is not being assessed in in any of the existing reviews. Hence, there is a strong need for this review. Talking about the theory of change for this review, we will be using the mid-level of theory of change for this review. So a conventional theory of change answers the question how program inputs and activities get converted into intended outputs and outcomes. So, and this is applied to specific interventions. For example, we have the reach and the groundwork in the UK. So as opposed to this, a mid-level theory of change looks at causal processes, which is stated at a sufficiently general level and as to apply to a specific interventions in different settings. So a mid-level theory of change allows for transferability. And the mid-level theory of change we have was introduced by the sociologist Merton in the 1960s. And Merton stated that much of the existing sociological theories are too abstract and couldn't be tested. So he advocated the need for theories in which the relationship between the social constructs could be tested, and hence stated the mid-level theory of change. So the mid-level theory of change sits between atheoretical empiricism, which is seen largely in randomized control trials, and the gram level theory. So, and our assumptions for this theory, for the proposed theory of change, our assumptions are things which need to be true for the program to work as intended. So our assumptions for the proposed theory of change are that mentors are available and the mentors and the mentees are correctly matched. The mentees do show up and remain engaged through the course of the program, and the mentors have the needed skills to and provide them the needed skills. So here is the proposed mid-level theory of change. So we have conceptualized this mid-level theory of change, drawing from the strength-based and the asset-based theory. This is the preliminary mid-level theory of change. And in this figure, the gray boxes contain our intermediate outcomes, and the blue boxes contain the next level outcomes, which eventually lead to the behavior change, which is antisocial, violent, and offending behavior. So we also see the intermediate outcomes and the initial outcomes will be assessed from quantitative studies. However, this theory of change not just looks at output and outcomes, but it also looks at particular processes involved in mentoring. So the orange or the pink boxes show the elements that contribute to reduction in delinquency. So the elements of mentoring, adult mentoring programs that lead to a reduction in delinquency. So analysis of these elements will be done from qualitative studies, and this will help in detangling causal processes. This theory of change will further be refined as the review progresses. And in this theory, through our theory of change, through this review, we also plan to test some of the most commonly used theories in mentoring, such as the attachment theory, the cognitive theory, self-determination theory, and the diversion theory. So some questions that arise from the theory of change that we have proposed is, what should the mentee training cover? What should be the basis for mentor-mentee matching? How best to manage mentor-mentee matching activity? How to reduce the dropout of mentees? What level and type of supervision is required? What should be the duration of mentoring sessions and of the mentoring relationship? What should mentees do with their mentees? What determines the quality of mentor-mentor matching? How to best manage termination? Which is the most cost-effective, structured or unstructured? Which is more cost-effective? Is it structured mentoring or unstructured mentoring? And again, which is more cost-effective? Is it one-to-one adult mentoring or is it group mentoring? Having in mind the theme of this conference.
Monisha, you have less than 5 minutes left.
Okay, sure. My internet is much better now, so I'll try and turn the camera on. So having in mind the theme of this conference, I will now quickly talk about youth crime in the Indian context. So if we look at youth crime in the Indian context, the overall incidence of youth crime in the Indian context has gone up by 30% over the last 12 years. But however, if we look at youth crime in India, contrary to the popular assumption that much of the youth engage in heinous crimes such as rape and murder, if we look at the data from the National Crime Records Bureau, it suggests that youth engage, close to 90% of youth less than 18 years engage in crimes such as theft and burglary. And youth crimes account only for 0.67% of the total crime population. In India, much of the interventions relating to youth crime revolves around the Juvenile Justice Act. The Act was amended in 2016, and in 2016, it was decided, the Act allowed for children in the age group of 16 and to 18 to be tried as adults. And if we look at the context of youth crime in India, majority of the children are also being held accountable for the crimes that they commit under the current juvenile justice system. And we are still largely, our approach to youth crime is still largely driven within the legal paradigm. On the right side of my screen is figure 2. It shows the number of juvenile crimes between 2015 to 2018. And moving further, many studies in the Indian context, there is robust evidence in the Indian context to say that there is a strong link between poverty, literacy, family situation, childhood trauma, and other social factors on youth crime in India. According to the National Crime Records Bureau 2018, a majority of the children who engage in crime do not even have access to some of the most basic facilities, such as education and housing facilities in the Indian context. Research also shows that it is not uncommon in the Indian context to put children who with intellectual disabilities and with mental health challenges who engage in crime in observation homes. So there are also many researchers who state that there is need for more evidence in the area, particularly qualitative evidence, capturing the voices of children who engage in youth crime. So what is the potential relevance of this review for research, practice, or policy in the Indian context? So the review will definitely help in understanding will help in furthering the understanding of children and adolescents engaging in offending behavior in the Indian context. It will help in relooking the lives of children and adolescents engaging in crime from a different perspective, moving beyond the legal perspective, moving beyond the deficit perspective, and moving beyond the punitive perspective. The review will aid in understanding some of the best practices relating to adult mentoring, and these practices can be applied in the Indian context. So this will help in filling some gaps in intervention. Evidence from high quality studies from the review may suggest implications for policy, and high quality qualitative evidence from the review may inform may stimulate similar research work in the Indian context. Thank you.
Thank you, Monisha. We will take questions in the end for all three panelists together. The next panelist is Ashima. Ashima is Ashima is a program manager and research officer at Campbell, South Asia. She is also part of the program. She used to be part of the program team at International Initiative for Impact Evaluation and has previously worked on gender and adolescent and early childhood issues. Ashima, over to you.
Thank you, Nayyara, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I will be talking on the effectiveness of wilderness therapy and adventure learning in reducing antisocial and offending behavior in children and young people at risk of offending. So these are the research questions that the review will be addressing. The long and short-term effects of wilderness therapy and adventure learning on antisocial, violent, and other offending behaviors, as well as intermediate mental health outcomes like pro-social behavior and self-regulation. We will also be looking at cost effectiveness of these interventions as compared to other forms of treatment. So this is the inclusion criteria. The studies will include both effectiveness studies and process evaluations. The population subgroups are that we are looking at are youth aged up to 25 years who have exhibited or are deemed at risk of antisocial and offending behavior. The included interventions would cover these aspects. The program involves wilderness therapy, challenge activity, or adventure learning. Challenge activity is defined as rock climbing, ropes course, hiking, or backpacking. The program is an organized activity, the program is targeted towards children and people who have offended or are at risk of offending. We are not including primary interventions, just secondary and tertiary interventions only. So these are the outcomes that we will be looking at. The primary outcomes are aggressive behavior, offending, and violence. The intermediate outcomes would be mental health, internalizing behavior, time use, treatment completion rate. We will also be looking at family-related outcomes like quality of family relationships and functionings, and improved interpersonal relationship with peers, and also school-related outcomes like improvement in academic performance, etc. We will also be looking at cost-related outcomes like cost effectiveness of the wilderness therapy interventions. So these are the study designs that we will be including: experimental designs, which are RCTs, non-experimental designs with the non-randomly assigned comparison group, process evaluations, and qualitative studies of interventions. We will not be including before. We will not include before versus after with no comparison group, and ex-post single difference will be included as there is a comparison group. Next slide. So this is the proposed theory of change. The positive effects of wilderness and adventure learning operate through a number of channels. The outdoor setting of the wilderness program offers restorative benefits. It may also utilize adolescents' inclination towards spontaneity and self-disclosure. Group activities and safe spaces encourage pro-social behavior, and youth may be more likely to open up in a structured activity where focus is on a challenge. Being placed in an unfamiliar environment combined with the challenge element helps break down individual barriers with a focus on sort of cooperation, and fosters opportunities for participants to develop group cohesiveness and pro-social behavior. So wilderness programs also provide youth with the diversion element, meaning that they provide youth something to do rather than hang in places where they are at risk of being drawn into criminal behavior or being in the wrong sort of company. The wilderness and adventure instructors and counselors, they also play an important role, and in assuring that this environment promotes growth by creating and helping relationships that are genuine, congruent, and by providing unconditional positive regard. So we are currently at the coding stage, and we searched a lot of databases, which include Medline, SciInfo, Scopus, REPEC, ERIC, and the US National Criminal Justice Database, and we got about 6,032 studies. We removed 92 duplicates. We screened 5,940 studies, and of which we excluded 5,397 studies. So the studies that went to full text screening were about 826, and the reasons for exclusion were target group, intervention, excluded on outcome, excluded on study design. So finally, we have included 128 studies in our review. So the reason for doing this review, this is an update. There are no recent effectiveness reviews on wilderness therapy programs. There is no mixed method systematic review that assesses effectiveness of wilderness therapy and adventure learning on youth at risk of offending. So the last review of wilderness therapy, Wilson and Lipsey, was in 2000. And the review found that program length was not related to the magnitude of the effect on offending behavior among the short and medium term programs. So there is also a more recent review of Fernie, but that is qualitative, and it excludes programs intended for children displaying offending behavior. Owen and Neil also carried out a meta-analysis of outdoor challenge activities, which included 197 studies, but they found they had a moderate short-term effect size on behavioral outcomes, but they did not report offending. Yes, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashima. That was really interesting to hear about all the different kinds of interventions. I always, as the evidence lead in my organization, I'm always trying to find out what are the things that actually work when it comes to youth. And it was really great to see the evidence for the different kinds of interventions that work with youth and children who are at risk of violent behavior. I think we can take some questions here. I can see that we have a question in the chat box. We can start off with that. So the first question is, can you say anything about the role of inequalities in the effects seen here? Were all socioeconomic groups represented? With Suchi, would you like to answer that? I saw your head nodding. If you were nodding. Suchi, you're on mute. Can you hear me? Would any of the panelists like to take this question on the role of inequalities in the effects seen here? Monisha or Ashima, would you like to answer this question?
Is I'm audible now? I'm
Yes.
so sorry. Yeah,
No,
so maybe, So maybe this is like, thanks for the question. It's actually, it's regarding the sports, I think so, in regards to, we have this BAME population. We actually also got this information on the Black, Asian and minority ethnic group. So there was only 8 studies that we got, which has 80% of the population is BAME. Even though in the meta regression result, when we actually did our meta regression result, we actually see that the groups in regards to the person who are like 80% of the ethnic minority, or like 30 to 79% of the ethnic minority, we actually see that there was an outcome. There's a difference that we see in the groups regarding the delinquency, externalizing behavior, internalizing behavior, and social skills, and pro-social behavior and academic achievement. So like we actually see that this has an effect. And when the sports intervention is given into different groups, even though the number of the studies are very less, we also see that there was a mean difference between an mean effect size on aggression was statistically significant. Even like if a intervention is given to a sports intervention is given to a minority ethnic group, which is like 80% of the group is like, so it has a more effects than the groups, than the other groups. And then it's like it was statistics signal for aggression, and we don't got any studies on self-esteem. So it was there, but then we have a very less number of the studies. That is the main, like we got a very less number of studies which has a 80%. But then we actually see in the meta regression result that the this has an ethnic group has a statistically significant in the result. um, that's about. And there was also one of the question, I think so, that's Howard wanted to us to answer, which is Sabina, and she actually addressed it to me, why we have not included before versus after studies. Before versus after studies, actually we have this like Campbell EGM on youth crime, where we actually included before versus after studies. But in review, we actually thought like before versus after studies is already a low confidence study finding, and then in the review we also want to see the effectiveness of the intervention. So in Campbell, we actually not very much like as a team also in the and also Campbell in this in the reviews, we are not very much supported to include before versus after study, because it's already a low confidence study finding, low confidence in the study findings. And then we also need to see the effectiveness of the intervention in both, like so that we can have a good comparison group to compare it, that the intervention is very effective. And this has actually applicable to all the reviews. We don't include before versus after studies in wilderness, also not in mentoring. I think so this answer, Sabina, and thanks to the Fiona, like I think so I have answered it. If anything they can answer again, they can ask me.
Thanks, Suchi. That was really helpful. Ashima and Monisha, did you also find any interesting inequalities? Anything about the role of inequalities in your review?
So, like I said, at mentoring, we're currently in the screening stage. So we've just started the title and the abstract screening. So we haven't got there yet, but that is something we're definitely looking forward to knowing.
Thanks. Ashima, did you?
Same, I would say same for wilderness. Uh, we are just starting with the coding, so I think data extraction would help us in like answering this question a bit more in detail. So we are waiting for, like, I'm actually excited for to analyze whatever data we'll extract. And I think as a team, we unanimously agreed that extracting as much data as possible is always a positive, as it would lead to a rigorous analysis.
I think that's right, and it's one of the things that we usually see in our work at the Youth Endowment Fund, is that often there's not enough data or not enough rigorous studies on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic populations, even though most Black, Asian, and minority ethnic populations tend to be overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So that feels like a huge gap in current existing studies. So that was a really, really useful question. Thanks, Fiona. And thanks to our panelists for discussing that. I think we have another question on from Fiona. Were you able to include young people and children in these reviews? And if so, in what ways?
I
I think all the panelists talked about children
Yeah,
and young
yeah,
people
yeah.
from the age up till the age of 25 years.
Yes.
Uh, I think, please, everyone, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. In the meantime, um, I have a question for the panelists. So it's more a sort of discussion. We have real problems with actually implementation. What we see on the ground. So a clarification from Fiona. You meant their voices. That makes sense. Yeah. So we have this problem about implementation on the ground to actually find out what works and what does not work. And because of that, we have developed the toolkit, the Youth Endowment Fund toolkit, currently it is based on all the research work, all the systematic reviews that we have commissioned with Campbell. And it's one of those approaches. We list out all the 13 approaches that can help prevent children and young people from getting involved in violence. We actually want to make sure that other countries also take up the toolkit and implement it in their own countries, in their own contexts. I think a lot of some things might change when they actually tailor it to their own individual countries' needs. But I think it's something that we can, I think everyone would benefit from having, because it makes your knowledge much more accessible and in actually helping to implement practices on the ground based on really solid systematic reviews. So, does anyone have any thoughts on implementation? What are the challenges that you face in implementation literature?
So I did bring this up briefly in my presentation also in the Indian context. So I think one of the biggest barriers to implementation in the Indian context is we look at uh, this within the paradigm. It is seen only within a legal paradigm. There is act, except for some services that are recommended by the Juvenile Justice Act of 2016. Most of these services are also offered in so-called observation homes and institutional setups. But apart from that, there is not really much work happening at the grassroots level, both in terms of prevention or in terms of rehabilitation. So I think drawing from a toolkit like this will be of great help in the Indian context. It is going to be of great use, not just for researchers. I also think for people working in this field, we just have a handful of organizations that work in this field. And we look at, for instance, we have the HUC organization. If we look at their website, one theme that is something that is stated again and again is lack of evidence for implementation, lack of they do not have anything to draw from. So I think it is going to be very relevant in the Indian context and extremely helpful.
Thank you, Monisha. If anyone is interested in finding out what works in interventions and how to actually apply it on the ground, please refer to the Youth Endowment Fund's toolkit on our website. And if you need any help in applying it to your own countries, please do get in touch with me. Happy to have a chat with you anytime on this.
And I think also, sorry, to answer Fiona's question, Harvard has responded to her. So we used the TBSR framework to conduct the qualitative analysis, and we had a section on what CYP say, what the children adolescents say, and we have carried out thematic analysis based on the narratives of what children have said about their experiences of availing sports services, and in general about they've given their feedback. So we have carried out that has been a part of our analysis, the qualitative analysis of the sports review.
Sports review. And
Yeah,
also that is
in
also part
general,
of the that is also part of the presentation that we said that the boredom, hypothesis and diversion. They said that like sports actually help them to divert, and then also not being engaged into anti-social peers and not being like, so they actually diverted their energy. They're not being part of the now anti-social peers. So they've actually said that it's actually helped them. So
I
it was covered.
actually want to. I think that's a really important point, and how we actually get the voices of children and young people into the review process, and that's something that I personally encourage, and we, as an organization at the Youth Endowment Fund, we actively do this. So at various levels, we make sure we take in young people's voices. So we have a youth advisory board that regularly feeds back into our review process. Secondly, we have regular panel sessions. So that's with experts and practitioners and policymakers who work with a particular kind of intervention. So we have regular meetings with them to get their feedback during the review process. And the third is we also have an internal advisory group on which has young people in it. So we get their feedback as well. So we have a 3-layered process by which we get young people's lived experiences and voices on the effectiveness of interventions. This was really very interesting. Thank you. I think we are very conscious of time. This was a very, very exciting session. We discussed a lot of things about what works, what does not work, which kinds of interventions, and the studies underlying it. We had an exciting set of panelists. And if you need if anyone wants to find out more about what works and our Youth Endowment Funds toolkit, please do get in touch with me. So thank you all. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.